You're on.
My name is Beverly Sanders, and today is May the 9th, 2013. I'm visiting with Phil Fenn at the McFarland United Memorial Methodist Church in Norman, Oklahoma. This interview is for the historical records of McFarland United Methodist Church, as well as for the Voices of Oklahoma United Methodism project of the Oklahoma Conference Oral History Research Program, which is coordinated through the Commission on Archives and History with the support of Oklahoma United Methodist Historical Society. And Phil, I want to say thank you for being with us today and taking this time to talk with us about some of the important history of McFarland.
Thank you for doing the project. I think the history is important, particularly for the local church, as well as the conference.
I'm glad to hear that. Would you start by just introducing yourself and telling us about your connection with McFarland?
Yes, you've already given my name. I'm Phil Fenn, and that was my privilege to serve this church as senior minister for a good number of years. I came here in 1979, never been to Norman before except one time, never been to McFarland before except one time, and I think that was during my college years. So I had no memory impression whatsoever. And so I was brand new to the community and to the church when I was assigned here. And in those days, when you were assigned as a Methodist minister to a new place, you were given strict instructions. You don't go scope it out. You don't talk to anybody. You just show up and say, I'm the new preacher.
And when you came here, what kind of condition did you find in the building and the facilities?
The building was in very sad disrepair. It was beat up, it was old, it was smeared. There were water stains on the ceiling, there was battleship linoleum all over the church. There was an open sewer in the men's restroom. I remember that the person who was president of the UMW at that time said to me that when she walks in the sanctuary, it just screams remodel and redo. The parsonage was in equally sad repair with old furniture, stained walls, and a woefully out-of-date kitchen. The first full day on the job that I spent down here, I walked through the building and got acquainted with it. And quite literally, I was depressed. It was in such sad shape. Now, some of that depression probably had to do with the whole process of adjustment and being new and change and so forth. But a lot of it just had to do with it looked bad.
And when you arrived, what did you find being the priorities of the people, of all the trustees and people already here on the board as far as working with the building?
Yes, well actually some groundwork had been done to begin the process for renovating and restoring the sanctuary. And some actual groundwork had been done about raising some money. Buddy Pendarvis, who is a lawyer and who served as church chancellor for a good number of years, is actually the one who carried the legal end of getting a bond project ready to raise the money to restore the sanctuary. That bond project was for $500,000. We issued bonds for 1 to 15 years at varying interest rates. Interestingly enough, the highest yield was 9%. We sold between $300,000 and $350,000 to $400,000 worth of bonds ultimately. And one of the interesting things about it to me was that the interest rates were very high then. And we took the money and sat on it for a year and earned about $20,000 in interest before we actually got into the project, which was the complete renovation of the sanctuary, plus some ancillary projects. We added 44 parking spaces to the west parking lot, and we redid the drainage. And we had stained glass windows, and particularly the large south windows was bulging and very much in danger of collapsing, and all that was repaired in that particular project.
And so that would have been about, you came in '79, and so about how long did it take?
That would have been
happen?
about 1980.
About 1980, so we got it underway right away.
Yeah.
Were there problems that made it difficult for McFarland to consider any more than just this renovation at that time? Was there any conversation at all yet about the necessity of expanding McFarland?
Yes and no. There wasn't really any intentional effort, just other than to get through and passed the sanctuary renovation. They gutted the sanctuary, took the pews out. The congregation during that time met in the old fellowship hall for worship services. But as soon as we got through that, for the next 20 years, McFarland was on an expansion project. In 1979, the only property this church owned was the property the old building was sitting on, which was the southwest corner, about 1/4 of this present block. And we owned about 2/3 of the west parking lot, and that was it. So there was no possibility of expansion whatsoever unless we acquired property. And there were several lots to the north of the church and all these lots to the south of the church and so forth. And after we got through the renovation project for the sanctuary, I mentioned to James McCall, who was a well-known realtor in town, that McFarland was waiting for something to happen and we needed to make something happen. And James simply replied, I'll snoop around and see what I can find out as far as the acquisition of property. And within the span of 15 to 20 years, we purchased all the lots on the north and all the lots on the south for expansion. One of the lots and houses on the north was given to us by the mother of Mrs. Evan Blatchley. She left that in her will. The house on the east, the northeast corner of this present block, came up for sale, and the trustees considered it, and at that time we just didn't have the money. I remember being heartbroken about that, but Harold Hunicke, he was a long-term member of this church and a financial advisor, and gee whiz, purchased it and held it, and then later gave it to the church. So, and then the property to the immediate east, on which the new building sits, and that was about a $6 million project, was owned by a lady, and when I came here I was told that she would never sell to the church. And the misimpression was that she was mad at the church, would never sell. That was the misimpression. Actually, it was kind of like a homestead in her family, and she was just eager to hold on to it. But it was the purchase of that property which was made possible by John Izzard, who was a banker, who was their banker, and he got us together on a deal, and we purchased that property. When we got that property, then that made possible expansion from that point on. And it was a crucial piece of property because the city was against our developing any further north because it encroached on a residential area. They did not object to our expansion to the east because although there is some residential property over there, it's basically commercial property. So they didn't mind our going that direction. And there were zoning and code fights that all went along with this.
What was the situation as far as space within the church for having enough space for Sunday school and different activities?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that Linda Harker, our present minister, said to me not long after she came here, what in the world did you do without the new building? Well, it was tough. We started Sunday school classes in every area that we could find. We started Sunday school classes even on the landing, fourth floor landing. For a while we met in Sunday school classes in a commercial building across the street. And I actually went around the neighborhood and visited people about using their homes or using their business establishments for Sunday school classes. And one of the interesting sidelights of that, McFarland's never had enough parking as far as I'm concerned. I also asked people that own various pieces of property, could we park on it? And for a while, I actually assigned people to park in particular places because that was a greater comfort level to those who loaned their property for parking. They just want to know who was going to be there. Mm-hmm. And it also, if there was a family who would always park in the same space, we would know that it would free up other spaces that we had in our parking lots. You know, I hope I answered the question. I forgot the original question now.
The original question was, how were we fixed for space? And the parking space is certainly part of that question.
Yeah.
And the Sunday school and the activities part is...
Even the office space was cramped when I came here. I think there were 2 or maybe 3 employees all using the same space, and we were all bunched up together. There was no way a minister could have privacy talking to anybody.
So you've already kind of mentioned, then when did we start to get serious about trying to get down to fundraising and consider putting this atrium and addition over here?
You know, I don't know that I can exactly answer that, but we probably really got serious about building the new building after we purchased that east property. But from the word go, I think for 25 years, this church has been one project or another as far as capital improvement is concerned. It was the sanctuary, then we redid the Sunday school rooms, we redid the office area twice, if I remember correctly. We did all the windows, replaced all the windows. We did air conditioning and heating work, we did drainage work. I'm forgetting something, I don't know what. We were just doing it all the time.
Extending the elevator to the 4th floor.
That's exactly
That was
right.
a
I had
big-
forgotten about that till I took the elevator up.
I was chair of the Education Commission at the time.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I remember that when we came to visit with you about
Yeah.
trying to get something
Well, you're
done.
an example of something. I know someplace down the line you're gonna ask about names. I mean, there have been people all over this church, such as yourself and Joe, who've served very key positions and done a lot of things that have enabled all of this. So it's almost unfair to mention anybody because there's so many other people
Right,
that have done some things.
Just, and I don't remember when that was.
Yeah, that was early on, yeah.
I remember having a big celebration and we all went out and released balloons and everybody toured the whole renovated area of all the classrooms. when it
That was
finished.
after the renovation, wasn't it? I think Joe took those pictures. Didn't you take those pictures of those balloons? Yeah.
So you said you answered that you really don't exactly know when we really began gathering people together.
There was a small committee, and you know, I'm embarrassed that I'd forgotten who served on that committee. I remember that Marion Bauman was on it. And we had a long, very late night session, probably went to 11 o'clock at night, and we took a vote. And it was to proceed with trying to do a new building and to raise approximately, I've forgotten what the figure was, but the final price tag was around $6 million. That was a historic meeting, and I'm sorry I don't have a recollection of when it was, but that's when
Maybe
we
Marion will. We're talking to him next week.
Marion may know.
What can you tell us about the fundraising campaign?
Well, we've had several fundraising campaigns, and on that particular campaign, we hired or employed a professional fundraising company. And they came here and did training sessions, and we involved lots and lots of people and so forth. There are all kinds of committees on this. People just did an extraordinary job on that. Then one of the features was luncheons or dinners in private homes. I recruited various people to host one of these luncheons or dinners. And then you would invite X number of people to come, and I would make a sales pitch, and the person who was here with the professional fundraising company would say something, and that's the way we raised most of this money. And it was a very interesting collection of people that opened their homes to that. It was amazing.
And what in particular do you mean by an interesting collection of people?
Well, there were people who were very much at the heart of the church, quite honestly. Quite honestly, there were people who were very much on the periphery of the church. But it feels awkward to say this. They had big homes, and we were able to get a lot of people in there. And they had the means to do it. Yeah.
So at what point did the people make their pledges while they were at those dinners or
Yes,
luncheons?
but there was no pressure put. We explained the whole thing, and then passed out a certain amount of printed information, and asked gifts for categories. I forgot exactly how it was spelled out, but the highest gifts we were asking for were $750,000 on down to what you could do. We did get one gift for $750,000.
Wow. Now, and that was the campaign that was called The Spirit is Building.
That's correct. I'd forgotten the title of it, actually, but there's a brochure on that, yeah.
I think I only remembered it because Marion Bauman mentioned it.
Oh, is that right?
It was when I was first talking to him.
That may have been, Andy Payton was chair, and you mentioned that maybe his wife was co-chair. And that may have been Andy's idea.
Right. Marion said that he and Diane and Andy and Terry were the co-chairs.
Is that right?
That's what he said. So
I'd forgotten that.
okay. And you said you don't really have a memory as far as the dates when that actually happened.
No, I don't.
Maybe Marion will have.
I noticed even on the Spirit is Building campaign folder, there's not a date, so I tried to find it.
any idea in time-wise, how long it took to actually raise? I'm sure that this, something like this can't go on forever, it begins to grow old. Any idea how long it took to raise the pledges to?
I don't. We must have been working at that for a year. So, It culminated, as you know, in a big unified church service at Lloyd Noble. And
That's exactly my next question.
The thinking there was that there was something in the campaign literature from the company that we employed that mentioned you have to have needed to have a big Sunday where you got all the people together. Well, typically, less than a third of any church's membership will ever show up on any given Sunday morning. And we were shooting to get 50% to 75% of our membership out. And to do that, we just didn't have the facilities. So that's when someone conceived the idea of going to Lloyd Noble, and we had a big celebration there. And I think that was the Sunday of the ingathering of the pledges themselves. And then after that, they were totaled up, and we knew what we had or didn't have.
I remember that was a wonderful, wonderful occasion.
You know what? I invested so much of myself in that, it's just a haze to me now. I mean, I was just so worked up about it. Yeah.
I believe then, if I'm not mistaken, it was probably the next Palm Sunday that we broke ground.
You know that? I don't remember. But there was a marvelous groundbreaking. Kathy Mash, he was one of the most creative employees that the McCarlins ever had, has basically put that groundbreaking ceremony together with the help of the committee. You may have been on the committee.
Right, we were on the committee.
And did many clever things, including stakes with ribbons and the outline or the imprint of the church, and they did all around the footprint of the new building. Then people stood around that and outlined it.
Yeah, and everybody took a stake home that says, "I have a stake
That's
in
correct.
McFarland's future."
That's correct. Yeah. Was that your idea?
No, that was Kathy's.
Okay.
Yeah, Kathy's maybe and Betsy Payne. I think Betsy Payne was much involved in that.
My goodness.
Yeah. Do you remember the ladders?
The what?
The ladders at the groundbreaking?
You know I don't.
I had forgotten it until we started looking at pictures. But a lot of the people, for instance, Sharon Ray, who was the cook at that time,
Yes.
had a ladder so that she was up above everybody and they could hear her, and she was there in her chef's hat to say, "This is where the new kitchen will be."
Oh my goodness, I don't remember
and
that.
Wanda Clifton was there
Clifton,
with
yeah.
a child for the daycare
Yeah.
and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
I had forgotten that, but until we looked at the pictures. Let's see. Tell us about the agreeing on the plan and the architect and working on what kind of addition we would have there. What do you remember about that?
You know, I can't think of the name of the architect now. I can visualize him well, but he had done, one of his inaugural churches was First Methodist Church in Clinton, Oklahoma. He also did the Church of the Servant in Oklahoma City. And the thing that impressed the building committee so much, and we went around visiting these churches to see the works of various architects, was he did the atrium for Westminster Presbyterian Church. And that atrium is partly what inspired the atrium concept here. And he was great on light and space and that type of thing. And I will say that the atrium, which we have in our new building, in my opinion, has done as much for the personality of this church as anything that we've done. We never had a gathering place where people could just mingle and be together. In the old building, you came in and you were immediately disoriented. You didn't know whether to go up or down or one side or the other. The narthex has never been big enough to hold many people and so forth. But the atrium, although it was a battle to get it, has just
And would you go ahead and expand on that, it being a battle to get it?
Well, there were people who were against it. One such person felt like that we should just make solid classrooms on all. How many floors do we have? 4 floors over there?
There are 3 floors. Okay.
3 floors.
I guess,
And
yes.
originally that atrium was to go from ground floor up. But as the Children's Area Committee began to study what the children's area was going to look at, and particularly for the daycare, they realized that atrium with open space from ground floor all the way up to the ceiling created security problems for the daycare. And I think it was Lee Rogers who came up with the idea, let's just make the atrium 2 floors and make the ground floor where the daycare is so that you can secure it. Actually, I thought it's brilliant. It's worked beautifully, in my
Oh,
opinion.
he did.
Yeah.
It surely has.
Yeah, were you a part of that or not? Did the daycare?
I was on the building committee. I think by the time I was any part of it, the plans were already accepted. The design had pretty much well been set by that time.
Yeah, okay.
I know that there was some disagreement about should I say, the usability.
You know, one of the obstacles that we encountered was that all the fundraising that we had done prior to that, we had many fundraisers, we did quote unquote in-house ourselves. And there was a great resistance to hiring any kind of professional to help us. The opposition to that was just overwhelming. But fortunately, there was an individual who was not even a member of the church, who became quite wealthy with a business that had international reach, and a member of his family was only tenuously associated with his church, and he began making contributions to the church. And I went out to see him and said, in effect, if I could earmark your contributions for special things, it would be a great help. And over the course of a couple of years or 3 years, I really have forgotten, he probably gave up to $40,000 or $50,000 to the church. And I knew that someplace down the line we were going to have a professional fundraiser. And when it came time to approach the administrative board and the officers about doing that, I said, we have the money for that already, so we don't have to take it out of the budget. Frankly, from my perspective, that's the only thing that enabled us to get the assistance of that professional fundraiser. I don't think people would resist as much today, but in those days,
Probably not.
it was just a bad thought. Yeah.
Let's see. So I think we probably covered about what you wanted to say about working up to the building itself. Do you have particular memories of putting the building up while it was actually being constructed?
Well, I remember, well, let me say something. Marion Bowman, as you know, was chairperson of the building committee. Marion is a remarkable individual. He is multi-talented. He's a lawyer, he's a bank lawyer, he owned a bank for a while. He also has a remarkable understanding of some technical matters, including air conditioning and heating. Marion presided over that whole process with consummate skill. He was a consummate diplomat. We always had a few problems down the line. I don't think we could have had anybody better to run the show than Marion Bowman. I have said to Marion on more than one occasion that I'm honored that they named the fellowship hall Fenn Hall. It really ought to be named Bowman Hall. He just did. In contrast, the first project that we did after I came here was the renovation of the sanctuary, which was a big thing. Lee Rogers was chair of the trustees at that time. And it's not an exaggeration to say that during that process, Lee and I both were making daily decisions about what was to be done and what was not to be done. And when a much bigger project, $6 million, came along, and Marion Bowman was doing it, Marion was able to preside over all those decisions, and if he didn't know the answer, he knew where to find the answer with resources and so forth. Yeah. Yeah. It was phenomenal.
And I believe one of the times when I was talking with you ahead of time, you mentioned a person who was actually employed, I believe, to come down and check, an engineer who's
Yes.
to come down every day.
Vern Davis worked for the state of Oklahoma. He's an engineer. He's military background, had a career in the military. And McFarland and trustees wanted someone to come down every day and just take a look at things, see if it was being done properly. Vern came down practically every day, and he had been in charge of several construction projects during his career. And he examined things and just to stay on top. I remember asking Vern, in essence, when we were approaching the end, well, what about it? Are we getting a good building? And he said, you're getting a very good building. And he was pleased with what the construction company did, although it was delayed.
Yes.
2 years past its completion date, and there's a story behind that Marion Bowman can fill you in on, which was enough to make anybody lose their religion.
Yes, I remember some of them. We did a skit on that with one of the green grass festivals about all the delays and.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
I think we were also, when we were talking earlier, we talked about Little Fred and Big Fred.
Talked about what?
Maybe it was somebody else I was talking to. The two lifts that we have for Fenn Hall.
The two.
Well, I guess I got the wrong person. Maybe that was Marion I was talking about. The donations of the expandable lifts to work on the ceiling and the high things.
I don't.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought that in. I
Yeah.
thought sure it was you I was talking about.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, it had to do with.
You mean there's something I don't know? That's
Well,
not fair.
I thought, I'm sure you did. Just it was Fred Zappi and Mary.
Oh, the
talked about
lifts.
The lifts.
Lifts.
Okay, I was.
Yes, Fred Zappi was a critic of the project, particularly the atrium, but he was very faithful, always faithful to church. And Fred and I had some pretty sharp conversations across the span. But when he died, his wife, Nina, funded 2 automatic lifts for changing seating fixtures and so forth. And one's called Fred and one's called Zappi. I told Nina I just couldn't think of a better memorial gift from Fred Zappi. I think the comment was made at his funeral that when Fred got to heaven, he was going to redesign things up there. So
Yeah.
that was his art.
I was thinking that we had talked about that.
Yeah.
So I think that probably brings us up to the point to ask you what other events during your term as senior minister would you like for us to mention in here?
Well, there are several things. First, I do want to mention a particular family. There was a family of 8 children who were raised not far south of Norman on a homestead. Most of them went to an old subscription school. And when I came here, there were 3 of them left, and they were all sisters. The family was Hiram, who was a farmer, James Floyd, who was a geologist, Benjamin, who was a mechanical engineer, Reagan, who was with the agricultural department, Mary, who was with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Virginia, who was with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Nell, who had been a teacher in Leadville, Colorado, and Louise, who was a home extension agent with OSU, I believe. A very unusual family. They were very modest people, lived in very, very modest homes and so forth. I think it was the geologist who made a lot of money and passed it on to the family. As a result, the Perkinsons contributed a lot of money to this church. They contributed $350,000 to the organ. They contributed $500,000 to begin the McFarland Foundation, which is an in-house foundation, with the promise that in time they would make that gift $1 million. They gave $750,000 to the building campaign, and they left their home in Norman, Oklahoma, to the church, which sold, I think, at $125,000. So that's about $2 million that they gave to the church. Now that was crucial in a couple of respects. Of course, a gift of $750,000 puts you a long way down the road when you're raising a lot of money. I doubt that we would have had the organ had it not been for $350,000. That was another project to which there was a lot of opposition. Why spend the money on that? Nobody knew that they gave that money. As a matter of fact, the Perkinsons, and particularly Louise, threatened us with divine wrath if we ever revealed that they were the ones behind these gifts. They did give us permission to reveal that after their death. They're all gone now. As a matter of fact, by official action of the administrative board years ago, the organ is supposed to be called the Perkinson Memorial Organ. It is not, and we need to correct that someplace down the line. But it was, you would never have guessed that they had that kind of money. Louise was a very extraordinary person. I went out to visit them when they were on the old homestead, And the three sisters were probably in their late 70s at the time I visited them. They were out there on a tractor spraying the trees in their orchard. And just delightful people to talk to. And I wish I could think of some more ways to characterize them, but McFarland knows a lot of them.
I think so. I think if I have the right person, she was in the Brotherhood Builders Sunday school class.
Yes, she
and
was.
when it kind of went out of existence because people were dying out,
That's
I think
correct.
we had 3 members left.
That's correct.
Some of them came to visit in our Sunday school class, and I believe that she came and was there until she moved away.
More likely. She didn't move away, she died. So
Well, I was thinking that she went to a nursing home somewhere.
I don't believe she ever was in a nursing home. She was by herself, and
I
they
see.
had the place out in the country, and they had a home in town.
I see.
And I think she died while she was still living in that home. They're all buried down at Purcell.
And what else do you think of that you would like to mention?
Well, let's see. I made a few notes under the impact of the questions you thought you might ask, and let me just look and see if I've got anything circled here. I will say, I wanted to say something a little bit about the spiritual climate and the religious character of McFarland. When I was assigned to McFarland, I was not allowed to come down here and, as I say, scope it out. But I was very good friends with Wayne Coffin. He served this church for a good number of years, so I called Wayne up and I said, I'd like to talk to you, and I quizzed him about the church. And one of the things that Wayne said to me, which stuck in my mind, which subsequently proved to be extraordinarily true, was Wayne said, McFarland probably has the best lay leadership of any church in the state of Oklahoma. And he said that just because you may be serving another large church someplace doesn't mean that that church has more talent. Well, across the years, I have discovered repeatedly that that is very, very true. The lay leadership in this church, they know how to run a committee. They can take initiative on themselves. I've served churches where you had to hold everybody's hand to get anything done. That's kind of a hard comment to make, but it's true. But in McFarland, and also you have a marvelous pool of talent and expertise. When we started the McFarland Foundation, and the impetus for starting it was because of the Perkinson gift. I mentioned to Louise that if she were going to give that amount of money to the church, I didn't want it to just disappear into budget affairs, but it would be a marvelous opportunity to start the foundation, which will pay greater dividends over the long haul than anything else we do. I told Mary Joyce Rogers, who was really the church historian for a good number of years, that if I'm remembered for anything, I would like to be remembered for starting the McFarland Foundation. We started $500,000. It's approaching $4 million right now. But now I've forgotten my train of thought.
You're talking about the foundation and the Perkinson sisters' investment in it?
Yeah. I've forgotten where I was
And
going.
I've forgotten what the original
Yeah.
question was to start you on that.
It was the spiritual character, the lay leadership, and I was going to say about the McFarland Foundation, I've also said that if somebody had given me a blank check and said, go search the United States and bring in the best talent you can find for managing the money of the McFarland Foundation and getting it established, I probably would have ended up hiring the very people that we got out of our own local church. It was just incredible, the expertise that these people had. We had big name money managers on that. We had bankers, we had lawyers. I mean, we had people who knew their way around in that particular world, and it's been a great blessing. I also wanted to say that McFarland is a remarkably diverse congregation. It goes all the way from very committed fundamentalists to people that are very much on the opposite end of the spectrum, so much so that probably they have to exercise a little imagination to even say they belong to the Christian community, and everything in between that. And that's always been an exceptional challenge for anybody who has served as the minister in this church. But the remarkable thing about it is that, by and large, everybody has worked very harmoniously with everybody, and there have been lots of things that have been done and lots of achievements that have been made. And I think that's a great compliment to the church. There are always dust-ups someplace down the line, and that's true of any church. Basically, it was because of something I said in the pulpit or some administrative decision I made, or also something that a staff member had done or that a staff member had said. From my perspective, and I've been retired now for 10 years, so I've been out of the swirl of things at McFarland for that length of time, the physical property and the ministry and the programming of McFarland Church are in better shape, healthier now than they have ever been in the history of the church from its very beginning, and it's a real pleasure to watch that. Mm-hmm. And Linda Harker, our present minister, I think has brought it a needed difference in that she's very autobiographical and open in her preaching, and has a very heavy emphasis upon the Methodist tradition is piety, but we've dignified that word with spirituality. And I think probably that was a needed aspect here. Everybody brings their own skill set and their own ideas and so forth, and I think this is one of the great gifts that she does. I found that McFarland is a remarkable church to serve just because of the diversity in it and also because of its association with an academic community. I enjoyed that association very much. Yeah.
And mentioning, you say particular people and the way they work together, can I just give you a few names? I hesitate to start because, as you said,
Sure.
There'll be so many that we miss, but there's some people I would like to hear you comment on. Harold Hunicke, you reminded me of a little earlier. Would you talk about Harold for a little bit?
Well, there was Harold Hunicke and Barton Turkington and whoever was chair of the finance, and Joe was chair of the finance one year. Or what? 2 years? Okay. We never made a financial decision in this church without their consultation. I mean, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was Harold and who else did you say?
Barton Turkington.
Okay.
Barton, we called for years the church statistician, and he had records going back for 20 or 30 years on where we were on budget and what we could predict and so forth. And when it came to budget setting time, no proposal was taken to the finance committee, no proposal was taken to the administrative board that wasn't, first of all, worked out by those people. Harold handled a lot of the investments for the church. He was down in the treasurer's office practically every day. I think of Harold often. I think we've been through some years not too long past where the church was in bad need of that kind of guiding advice. So,
could you talk about the team of people in your office? Gene Powell, Hoyt McCarty, Hoyt McCarty Sanders, and Kathy Mash, as well, Mary Ann Williamson.
I mentioned that I had spoken to Wayne Coffin before coming down here, and the two things that he talked about were a good staff that was here, and secondly, the lay leadership was outstanding, and I always appreciate those comments, and that was true. Yes, Kathy's probably the best program coordinator that's been around, very creative. Sometimes didn't know what she was up to, but she was very creative. Gene Powell was a tough top sergeant. He didn't mind telling people where to get off, and we had some public relations problems with that, but there was nobody more dedicated to the church. And I always remember her first words to me. I, in essence, showed up down here one day. As a new preacher, I said, "I'm a new preacher, show me around." And in the process, Gene Powell said, "I'll do anything in the world that you ask, except for one thing. I will not give you my parking place." and she had a right to say that because there was a parking place to the south of the church right next to the building, and she would sometimes take work at home at night. In those days, we were using those massive calculating machines or adding machines that weighed a ton. So she would lug that thing after her car, and that's the reason she needed her parking place. I think of Jean often. As a matter of fact, when you called and said you were going to do this interview, I was thinking to myself, I wish Jean were alive. I would love to talk to her to get
There are a lot of those people that I wish were still here now.
Yeah. She was also a pack rat. She saved everything. This church was just brimming in the closets and the attic and the machine room downstairs with stuff she refused to throw away.
Yeah. She told us that the secretary's table that we use of the 2-in-1 classroom was the last remaining piece of the original furniture from 1924.
You know, I'm not sure that's correct.
Well, that's what I wondered if
Because this office, when, I wish I could think of the name of the lady who helped kind of remodel this office. There was an old table in here, and I don't see it's here anymore, and there were some old chairs, one of which was an old wooden, you know, rock back chair, which was a part of the original furniture that Phil Deschner had used when he was preacher here. And when Dr. Deschner died, his son, I think Phil Jr., said, I'd like to give some money to the church. What need can we give it to? And I said, you know, it would be marvelous if we could use that money to redo the furniture that was in this office, which Dr. Deschner used, and used it everywhere. I don't know, go fuss at somebody, it's gone
really
now. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And you didn't say much about Hoyt.
Hoyt, I remember the comment that Wayne Coffin made about Hoyt. He said, Hoyt is the church computer in regard to names. She knows everybody. And back in those days, most of us who were ministers still had a great conscience about doing visitation. Go out in the afternoon, knock on the doors and visit the people. I don't know that they do that so much anymore, quite honestly. That was actually a part of the disciplinary job description. And any time that I went out in the afternoon to do visitation, I would always consult with Hoyt first. Tell me about this family, tell me about this person. And she just rattled off. And she kept meticulous records. She had a drawback. When we computerized, Hoyt was the greatest resistance to that.
Really?
And I think it was a classic example of machine against personnel. That and of course it was an adjustment for all of us. I had never used a computer, and I remember spending hours learning how to do that thing, and then inadvertently losing my material or thinking you lost it, you know. So.
Did she come around to be able to use computers and enjoy having them? Or was she retired?
She had to. She resisted the training. We went to Oklahoma City to get training. Yeah, she came around because she stayed on years after we computed, and we've been through 2 or 3 computer establishments now. So, yeah, it was a marvelous thing. You mentioned what was the shape of the church? One of the things that I was amused about when I first came here, we didn't have any copy machine to speak of. We had the old style copy machine that had the roll of paper on it that was very, very thin. Well, even the church I came from had a Cadillac in comparison to that thing. And I was just amazed that's what we had. Yeah.
The mimeograph and the purple ditto.
Oh, the mimeograph, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one more time I'll say, do you think of anything else?
I
else you
think
want to mention?
I probably, if I looked over these notes that I put down, I probably would find something. I
Well,
wish
if
I
you-
could do a better job, and I particularly wish I could do a better job of mentioning the people. I've thought about the people many, many times, and actually that's what I think about most in the days of my retirement. But it's just almost unfair, as we've already said, to mention anybody because there's so many people who played a significant role here.
Yeah.
You know, there was something in there when I came here to McFarland. We had lost the music program, or we were in the process of losing it, which used to be the pride and joy of McFarland under John Yarrington. And the youth program had already collapsed. And so it was necessary to make changes there. And Perry White, he was a longtime music director here, resurrected, in essence, the music program. And he's due an awful lot of credit on that. And Roy Ben-Dur, who was the first to resurrect the youth program, but then we've had a series of very outstanding youth directors since then, including our present one, the loudest of them all, Scott Myers.
Yeah. I know, I just thought of another person, Harriet Turpington.
Yeah. Can't think of Harriet without thinking about Barton. Harriet and Barton, during the $6 million fund campaign, did the most thankless task of the whole thing. And it was somehow getting all the cards sorted and assigned and so forth to people. And you look back on things and you second guess yourself, why did we fail here, or what caused our success here? I think the Turkingtons, in a job that was really a very obscure job, and not many people knowing about it, probably had as much to do with the success of that campaign as anybody else. And of course, Harriet had lots of opinions, and she wasn't afraid to express them, and she was a great help in children's work. She helped organize the daycare, as you know. She also helped organize, we had a church kindergarten for a while. And
Church what?
Kindergarten.
Oh, yes.
And I was constitutionally against that because I was a supporter of public education. I actually called the school system to see if they had any real serious objections to our starting that. And Harriet and I had a kind of pact that we would have that kindergarten as long as there was a need for it. The school admitted that they didn't have day-long kindergarten, so we could use other kindergartens in the community. And as soon as that kindergarten went out of business, Harriet Turkington picked up the phone and called me and said, I want you to know that we're no longer in the kindergarten business. Now that all had to do with the issue of public education's against, and I grew up in the era and served churches in the area where a lot of churches were going into the education business as an integration dodge, and I just thought that was wrong. So, and Harriet was a feminist before her time. I don't know if you know that about her.
She was what?
Feminist.
Oh,
She carried,
yes, I believe so.
she carried
She was
that
one of my
banner.
teachers when I was getting my degree out of OU.
I think her funeral was the last funeral I did, and I remember saying, it was a true story, that we had a commission on the status and role of women in this church, which at one time was mandated by the Methodist churches. You have that, I think it's optional now. And I had discussed with the committee, it was basically women, inclusive language, and all the issues that are related to that. We made an intentional effort to make sure that our committees were balanced between male and female. And that's when we began, incidentally, putting women on trustees and putting women deliberately on finance, and also recruiting women to be ushers. And the first women ushers we here were not, by some people, greeted with the greatest of kindness.
And that was about when?
I don't remember. It's been a good number.
Soon after you came?
After I came? Oh yes, I'd been here 10 years.
Probably during the 80s then.
Yeah, probably during the 80s. But at any rate, during the inclusive language struggle, and that was a personal struggle for me, I had asked the Commission on the Status and Role of Women to take notes on Sunday morning and mark down any conspicuous violations of what I had said that it violated inclusive language. But I kind of got fed up, and I decided, well, I'll just inclusify everything. And so I remember saying such things, the devil she, you know, rather than the devil he. And that's, Harriet Turkington was the only one in the congregation who would catch that stuff. and she went out one Sunday morning and said, I'll get you for that.
And did she?
Yeah. Oh, you know, Harriet and I had that kind of relationship. As I said at her funeral, part of the privilege of friendship is knowing what buttons to push to get a reaction. And I could push her buttons and get a reaction very easily. Yeah. But they were...
Well, I think if you have nothing else that you think of, and I don't think of anything else right off, I'll probably will later.
Well, one thing, I'm delighted you all are the archivists and the historians. I think that's very, very important. You both have served important functions in this church, UMW, Finance Committee, everything else that I can think of, Building Committee, but also a historian. You've written a book for children on the history of McFarland. I think all that's very important. And I feel very good and very comfortable handing over to you some of these old documents and papers that I have. So,
I appreciate that.
thank you for your
And
work.
you have certainly supplied us with a lot of valuable information that's going to give us a good start, lot of good guidance to continue with our. I know that later I'll look back at this one and wish that we had known as much when we did this interview as we will by the time we finish our series of interviews.
Sure.
So we appreciate you taking the time to come, and we appreciate all the information that you have given us.
Joe's not in the picture, but he's back there in the background, so thanks to him too. So,
I had one question.
Yeah.
Bill. The two ladies that lived across the street over here, Jean Powell, I went over to one morning, she sent me over to escort The lady over here.
Eddie Wild,
Yeah.
was one of them. I don't know who the other one was.
I don't remember either.
Eddie Wild was a character. Eddie Wild had been, years before my time here, the church cook. And she was an absolute character. And I used to go visit her, primarily, you know, I'm confessing my sins now. I kept the lines of communication hot with the lady that owned the east property because I figured if I could soften her up on the church, we'd get that property a little bit. She used to walk her dog up and down the sidewalk, and I was in this office, and every time I'd see her out there, I'd rush out and walk with her, you know, just and I'd do the same thing with Eddie Wild, because she owned a piece of property over there that we were covetous of. And I'll always remember, I love telling this story. Eddie gave money to Oral Roberts, and right next to her bed, she had a picture of Oral Roberts. And I said, Eddie, I'll give you my picture if you'll give that money to the church.
Oh my.
She was something else.
Oh dear.
She was kind of a tough character, but she had grown up tough. She'd made her own way.
I hope you will continue with some more memories, and should you think of some more things, we can certainly do a follow-up interview later. If you think of some more things that we should mention, or if we think of more things that we didn't think to ask you about.
Yeah, I don't think I ever want to see that. I never liked myself recorded or on video. So.
Well, are you turned off?
Let's just hope that this actually works.